Welcome to the Real Nonsense Podcast, episode 13.
Well, racking up, Tony.
I am your host, Toni Smyth.
I am Ronnie Heath, the CEO of Real PE.
And I'm John Parsons, the Director of Innovation at Real PE.
Great to have you with us, both of you. For our listeners out there, if you've not joined us before, this podcast is all about the nonsense that still exists in standard practice in PE that we just wouldn't see in any other subject. And we talk about the small tweaks and changes that you can make in your everyday practice in PE that will turn something that seems like a complete nonsense into a fabulous and joyful learning experience. So welcome to anybody that's not listened before. We always start this podcast by framing a problem or a nonsense. And today's nonsense is deliberate practice is boring and repetitive. Ooh. And I love the ooh, I love it, ooh. Of course, we're talking about physical skills here.
Okay.
That's what we're going to really focus and hone in on, physical skills. So the deliberate practice of physical skills can be deemed to be boring and repetitive.
I don't think that's a nonsense in itself, is it? I think it can. So first of all, I could say, I would say it's not necessarily a nonsense because I think it can be quite boring and repetitive.
It can be.
Yeah. But I would also say that it is a nonsense that we think that's the only way or it has to be that way. It's a nonsense to think that's the only solution because actually, I'm absolutely certain where this is going to go because you two are awesome at this sort of stuff, is you'll be telling us all sorts of exciting ways to still achieve deliberate practice.
We've only had, across 13 episodes, one other it depends. And this feels a little bit like, and that was, we've only had one verdict. I like to think of us as a panel of judges. One verdict where it was it depends. And this feels close to that, as in, deliberate practice is boring and repetitive. It is a bit of a nonsense. It can
be, yeah.
But we're saying deliberate practice can be, if it's not done well, be a bit boring and repetitive. So we're not saying it's a complete nonsense. We're saying we can see that possibly there are times when deliberate practice of physical skills can be a bit boring and repetitive. And on this podcast, we love to provide solutions. So let's really focus. Ronnie, you've given a bit. John, just some initial thoughts about that statement as a nonsense.
Yeah, I think deliberate practice could be boring and repetitive if it's delivered in a boring and repetitive way. So I think, it can be. I think
this might be a short podcast.
I think it doesn't have to be. I think it's quite an adult term, isn't it? And Ronnie, I sat with you in a meeting yesterday where you talked about we don't practice our instrument, we play. And particularly in a school setting, but anything working with children is, we want them to feel as if it's enjoyable.
Yeah, we play sport. We don't work sport, right?
Yeah. But there's some things that we they do need to practice and get some repetition. We'll talk, the idea of repetition without repetition later, as kind of a way around this. I won't get into that too much. So I think
before we get into our solutions, why might it happen that deliberate practice can be boring and repetitive? Why does the boring and repetitive bit happen when we're trying to learn a physical skill?
Because obviously I wear two hats. So I also coach regularly and support coaches in a grassroots football club. And I think there's a big thing around it. We talk a lot about this. It's how things are often being done. So I think there's a perception that the only way to do it, to learn these things, is in a very sort of drill-based, rigid. They've just got to get the reps in. They've got to, stand apart and do the same thing over and over and over again in order to be able to develop this thing before they can then apply it into context. And I think that's where it potentially becomes a problem because you're missing the other bit around, but the kids are finding it really boring and disengaged. So I think what we'll hopefully talk about later is ways to get that sort of repetition in, but do it in ways that are going to be more valuable and engaging.
Also, let's be clear, Ronnie, that deliberate practice is vital for physical learning, isn't it? As in deliberate and repetitive practice of a particular skill is quite vital. So that's not the nonsense. In order to learn physically, we need to deliberately have lots of opportunities to repeat a skill in order to lay down those neural pathways
and either do that,
physical pathways to learn.
Exactly that, and often deliberately at the right sort of quality and level. Yes. And I think, I think it was helpful that people talked about 10,000 repetitions, but the truth is it's around the quality. It nearly always comes down to that. So it's that quality of repetition. So we have to find a way to make a very deliberately appropriate challenge and repetition, right? But again, the reason for it is, why wouldn't if a primary school teacher hasn't had support or guidance or shown how to do some of those things differently, why would they know? And actually I've seen some really very experienced coaches say, at the end of the day, if you want it badly enough, you have to go and put the reps in, and you have to put that work in. And it's a delayed gratification. I kind of believe a little bit in that, but it's just, again, not necessary for it to not feel like play.
Okay, so let's acknowledge that the deliberate practice is pretty essential, but the nonsense is the boring and repetitive, isn't it? So we need a bit of deliberate practice.
Or feel repetitive in the sense that it's just done in one context, one way. Yeah.
So we know why it happens. So we were talking off air. I gave a little example about sometimes we don't know any better. Sometimes we can't find a more creative way, and that's maybe where our solutions will come in. So if we're trying to learn a particular pass in netball or basketball, that sometimes as generalist primary teachers or not being subject specific, and even some of our very best coaches out there will think of their one way, which is to do that particular pass against a wall or with another person. And actually that particular practice has value, but we can't just solely do that for either the entire session or repeated over 6 sessions, or as in it, there needs to be some deliberate, but sometimes the why does it happen or why does it feel repetitive and boring is because we only have one way in our memory bank and in our ideas bank of delivering that.
And I certainly don't think that in a primary school context, I need to know how to do a specific pass in rugby that's a very different one to a specific pass in basketball, it's a very different one to a specific netball, and then even try and pretend that has nothing to do with volleyball or a whole range of other ones.
So I concepts of passing
itself.
So
I think there's some concepts of sending and receiving and an opportunity for creative exploration in the early stage before, and actually some common principles around, following through, but is a really great opportunity to have lots of repetition of trying lots of things and steadily build before we steadily build into that very specific one. And as a consequence, we've all seen this, haven't we? That 9-year-old girl that doesn't matter what activity or sport you put her into, she just very quickly becomes the best at it because she's able to apply a wide range of skills into a new context. I mean, these things take time, but very quickly becomes almost a much higher ceiling because of that breadth of different ways of passing and receiving.
And we talked a previous podcast around the importance of stretch and challenge. And I think what you sometimes see, and you get a real sense that this becomes an issue where you see all the children doing the same thing.
Right.
The same repetition.
Right.
And you're looking at it thinking, there's children, they're bored because
that of course is going to be repetitive and boring for those that are not. Yeah, absolutely.
Just increase speed or distance or put in a whole range of challenge in there.
So there's 2 whys there. There's, why it might feel repetitive and boring is that we're lacking ideas and solutions in order to make it less repetitive and boring. It might be that that's the traditional model that we had delivered to us and we think that that's kind of a way forward. Or it might just be that it feels repetitive and boring for some because we're using a one-size-fits-all approach. We're using that kind of, we're all doing the same thing at the same level without challenge for those that need it, or maybe it being made easier for those others that need it. So there's 3 reasons why it might be feel that it's repetitive and boring.
And I think it'd be false in terms of the quality and the value of the subject to try and say that it's so important that you learn this skill because you're going to be able to do this in a sport in the future. Because I think, as I mentioned before, we shouldn't pretend to anyone that the rest of the world that thinks that our subject is important if we can make a left-handed layup in basketball, because that wouldn't convince anybody. But there is this lovely way in which being able to feel confident and joyful in our movement. Let's imagine, like, say, a sideways chassé and eventually when you're ready with your arms and feeling good, look, even knock my chin on me mic, get so excited that I can go the other way and put some pivots in the middle and combine that movement. But if that was done on a bear hunt and I'm swishy swashing or whatever else I'm doing there, I'm still probably repeating exactly the same thing. In some cases, it's not even like a cute little play on context. It's actually absolutely the same thing, but I've just got children excited about something they're interested in, or a subject they're interested in, or a story, an adventure, or a song.
So let's come on to some solutions. Right. There'll be challenges out there who'll say, when we first learn skills, that we need to isolate them and give them opportunity to do them in isolation and learn that there'll be people out there who will say the first time we learn how to
definitely is part of the sequence,
and exploring movement, that there needs to be time where we isolate that particular physical skill and we give opportunity to break it down and look at the knowledge associated with it, and actually there's value of that. Not just when we first learn it, but all the way through. That opportunity to isolate the skill.
That's important.
And to do it, and to really focus on the bits of it that make it good, how to be good, what we need to do to make it better. So skills in isolation are okay, and deliberate practice and repetitive practice. But let's talk about the solutions for deliberate practice to be less repetitive and boring, and add some lovely opportunities to diversify the way that we can take a skill and do it in lots of different contexts, so that we can repetitively practice it, but under pressure or with an adventure. So John, I know, tell us a few ways that you know that we can take a skill, have opportunity to repeat it, but give us some context in which we could do that.
So I think it's knowing the age and stage and the group you're working with. So it might look different. So you'll be very aware that, for example, with our youngest learners, with our foundations program, of course they're developing different movements and skills, but it's not done through we're gonna teach you sending and receiving today, or all skills. It's done through an adventure. We'll take them on an adventure, whether it's into space or in the jungle, or whether it's the circus. We'll do it through active stories. We'll do it through moving to music. We'll do it through thematic games. We'll do it through little skill challenges. There's lots of ways for them to develop those skills and get repetition, but in very different contexts.
Okay, I was about to say, so in those contexts, whether it's a story, a song, or an adventure, there has, of course, been deliberately written in, if the focus is sending and receiving, within that game, song, story, adventure, there are lots of opportunities to send and receive.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the point, isn't it? That we have given, they've been deliberately written in, so that within that age-appropriate context, there are lots of opportunities to practice that skill.
But we also assume, don't we, in that early physical literacy, that somehow, this is a good idea. It's a way of sort of making it look like we're not doing that, but we are doing that. But what is more relevant to a 6 and 7-year-old? The story they've been reading that day, or some of the maths work they've been doing around sequencing and numbers and repetition, or something around a piece of writing they've been doing that day. Well, that's far more relevant to them than to pretend that somehow we're doing this so that we might be able to do that in one particular sport in the future.
We're not doing it in secret, we're not hiding it.
No, this is actually joyful movement that I might apply in all sorts of contexts. It might be getting on a bus, or getting out of the bath, or doing a whole variety of stuff with my children, engaging and having fun and joining in with all sorts of fun and daft stuff on the beach, or whatever it might be, or in the forest in the future. So we don't even have to pretend that it's somehow a secret way of getting sports. It's not.
It's an engaging way.
Right. And an engaging way that's as relevant to a 6 or 7-year-old than any kind of sport might be right now for some of them.
And there's a reason why we set some home challenges, and our early years practitioners are brilliant at this. I love it when they send their pictures in of young people. They've had a focus on one-leg balance, and they've done their story, song, and adventure. And then there's opportunities at home to send in pictures of when you're repetitively practicing your one-leg balance at home, when you're cleaning your teeth, when you're stood at the counter helping
or
clean
mirroring,
up, when you're playing a mirror game with your parents,
collaborating,
when you're picking up your toys and helping do tidy up time, that you're doing it on one leg. Is that, our very best practitioners will set opportunities to repetitively practice that skill in context at home.
Yeah. And I think where we see challenges is where it's almost treated as a one and done. So, we do it for this period of time, once a year for these few weeks, and then we move on. Whereas actually, it's where the schools do build in cleverly that repetitive practice in lots of very clever ways, where you can see the children's kind of
so it is desirable, right?
Development.
It is desirable, but we have to find some really funky ways of doing that. And actually, I mean, if you don't mind me saying, I think you and the team, the stuff you've done on the real foundation stuff and the earlier stuff is some of the best stuff that's ever been done, and really relevant and directly. I love the fact that foundation and in fact nursery teachers, preschool stuff will look at the work that you've done to support them and ideas and actually immediately recognize that this is their curriculum. And also don't have to do this mental jump that says, oh, is that physical education or is that physical development? They see it as broader child learning. So it's physical development, but with a great opportunity to engage in all these other skills and repeat all these other skills.
They connect it to, it supports them to do that, but they'll take it way beyond. They'll connect it to communication language or personal social emotional development or understanding the world or maths or literacy. They start to make those connections. So physical activity is a driver for broader learning.
But by the time they get into 3 and 4, I'm right in saying that they'll find a way to, one of the cheeky ways you get to repetition will be things like personal bests.
Yeah.
And of course we have to play quite carefully with quality with personal best, don't we? But then again, choice that, and then some little collaborative games, and we can try and do that in pairs and some cooperative stuff, and then some little competitive little.
Yeah, I was just about to ask you both, as our learners get older, we've heard some lovely solutions for making repetitive practice of skills joyful, fun, connect a feeling with it, have a lovely hook, be engaging. And what happens as we get through to kind of early key stage 2? What might we do with it then? And Ronnie, you've just said things like challenging ourselves with personal best, putting in some collaborative work, some mini games.
Yeah, and I think now's a time where there might be some very deliberate relevance to this. I think all of us, when we get to that sort of age, like to believe I'm doing this for a reason, right? And there's and so again, I just think we've had this conversation before. Another real nice, it's like, do you do it through games or do you do it in isolation? The answer is both. And the answer doesn't have to be in a very linear both. There is a readiness sense to it. But actually, I mean, by far and away, my favourite way of teaching in primary schools for Key Stage 2 is whole part whole. We get into an open activity where very few rules, but they can have a little play and get involved. And we can go and go, right, what we're struggling with, what smaller groups, and we can go away and practice a little bit and have different choices about what we want to practice and where we need to work on. We can go back into that activity and they see a direct relevance. And we might do that process several times over several weeks where we're seeing how, by going away and practicing and some repetition, allows us to do that. It allows us then to access this game and have a little fun with it.
That's where we really do that connection with the other, we call them the cogs. So that game might be a very collaborative game. So it's about how can you work together and support each other to overcome a problem or achieve an outcome, or it's a cognitive challenge. Okay, right, so here's the problem. How can you work together cognitively and physically to overcome that problem? Right, this is a creative activity. Right, go and show us how you would do it. What different ways could you do it? Go and explore, go and come up with your own ideas. And I think it's connecting some of those things together. Then it both gets that repetition in, but also engages them in different ways.
Can I hone you down on, so for our coaches that may be listening and our teachers, when we do that whole part whole scenario, so say we introduce a game and a lovely open activity, how can we ensure that our learners are getting an opportunity to repeat the skill that we really want them to learn? So say our focus over 3 weeks or 6 weeks has been a particular pass or a particular footwork pattern. So like a chest pass, accurate chest pass, or a pivot or a reverse pivot. We've really focused on that, and we might do our whole part whole, and in the part section we might bring them out and we might really look at that skill in isolation. How do we modify our games? How can we do that? I've got some solutions, but I'd like to hear yours around how we modify our games to ensure that we're getting each young learner within that game, small-sided game, is getting as many opportunities as possible to use that skill.
Yeah, well, I think again, it's just you have to, and again, we provide this support, don't we, and guidance in terms of how to build. I think modify is a great term to use. Condition games and modified games to do that. I think we could probably spend a whole afternoon coming up with those little solutions. But to give examples to the listeners and the type of thing we might do is that the classic one I think we discussed before was like the 3 meters away practicing that specific pass. Even that you can just add tiny adds to it. So you could obviously after making that pass move to a new spot. And receive that ball into a new spot. You're still the same distance. So I've got a bit of cardio in, but it's also asked the person to receive it instead of just making that pass, but to look up and find the open person. Eventually say, right, you can't actually pass the person that's passed you the ball. So you'll go and find somebody else. And you build up that challenge that ends up being lots and lots of 3 meter passes.
Yeah.
But what an opportunity.
Not in a static and
Yeah.
repetitive
How
way.
quickly can you get to the other end with your
really-
partner by doing 3-meter passes?
That's a really important point, because I think where the challenge comes is, and you understand why, is there is a challenge around, you don't, in a game that doesn't happen where you stand in the same space back and forward, and actually you're taking out any kind of cognitive decision-making process. And actually, so what Ronnie's done is go, well, actually, they might not be ready to, they might need to take that interference out for a bit, because that having the defender, but we just want to take that noise out for a bit.
Right.
But we still want to maintain some kind of perceiving what's happening. And then, so just by moving to a new space, I've now got to be able to react and move and make, I've got to make that decision. And then, at some point it might be that they are ready for a defender and it's a 3v1 or whatever that might be. So we can still not go back into the full game, but move from
if I could then name why people get nervous about that stuff, they'll go back to some of the things you guys said very early on. Is first of all, it depends. Depends on the experience and the quality of group, how far you want to stretch them, how much you have to take out, how much you bump by making it a bit more challenging, how much you dodge by taking things easy ways to make it easier for them. And you're playing that game the whole time. And then what they'll say is, well, that's great, but I've got 30.
Yeah.
And then we'll say stuff like, well, maybe they have a choice. Maybe they can decide when they're ready they can do this or at this time. And then they say they can't cope with that. And I say, but it's quite an important thing to be kind of awareness of my learning and make a decision. So maybe it's okay that they make poor choices and fail at that because we're not here for one lesson. We're here for actually 7 years of learning. Yeah. And so therefore we might put a bit of investment into that. And we might talk about that. We might praise the child that decided to go back and do that little bit of practice, right?
And I think that journey starts in early years. So we often, I don't know if you've had the experience, but I've often had the least pushback on that shift in responsibility from early years teachers, because they recognise that's part of that kind of journey. And the earlier you start that, previous podcast talked about early intervention. Early intervention is not just about physical development. It's the earlier we start to build these habits and behaviours, it then becomes easier as the children develop, because it becomes the norm. The children kind of go, well, of course we get to choose and make decisions, and we know we're safe to do that because the environment and the context in this school.
Shout out to foundation team. Go on, John. Finish, John. Sorry.
Well, the context is we know we're allowed to do that and we're allowed to make mistakes. So I think the earlier we start that journey where, that becomes achievable, because you go, well, actually, there's 3 little progressions in this activity. I'm going to let you choose and collaborate as to when you move on and progress and move. And that's kind of everything we've done is based on that concept.
And great that you talked about it happening earlier. Big shout out to the foundation teachers. I've had the opportunity of failing in primary schools quite badly when I come from secondary for a little while. But oh my goodness, seeing what foundation teachers can do in terms of putting in clear structures, parameters, boundaries, but then much freer. I saw stuff in foundation lessons that I wasn't doing with year 7s in terms of trust and that kind of practice, having various different groups activity, often involving stuff like sand and huge amounts of equipment that they could, and somehow those foundation teachers doing that. And I think
it's really tough for year 7s if they haven't, if that's not what they're used to. Right. Kind of, and it's about building those early habits, isn't it?
Well, can I just say, do you remember when we worked for a couple of years in China? But do you remember, obviously it was incredibly varied, but do you remember working with some of the children, sort of year 7 and 8 in China, for some of the schools that very deliberately got us in for this issue, where we couldn't find a way for them to do something different. So if I demonstrated, and through the translation was that now you're going to try and do something different, you have to do something different to what your partner did. We couldn't, because that group of children never had the opportunity. It's very, very quite clear now that wasn't true of all the Chinese children we met or all the schools we met. But where they'd been taught in a particular way to follow a specific way of doing things became extraordinarily difficult for them later. So this idea that addressing these issues early, and back to that point we make, I think, on the Real P podcast, is when you see a really outstanding P lesson, you haven't seen an outstanding P lesson. You've seen several weeks, months, years worth of high quality teaching that leads to outstanding learning. Yeah. You haven't seen an outstanding lesson. You've seen outstanding learning over time. A gym lesson I saw in Northamptonshire, where it was year 6, and clearly the conversation I had after, you could see the whole kind of ethos throughout the school was building that kind of independence and that choice and responsibility. And it was fantastic. It was the children led the lesson. They worked in small groups, and the teacher, their role was literally to go around
provide a little bit of challenge, question, prompt, support, praise.
Proper teaching.
Yeah, and you just think, wow, that's clearly taken some time to get the children to that stage.
How interesting that we started this podcast today with a focus on deliberate practice of physical skills, and you have very quickly taken us into deliberate practice of all our learning behaviours make a huge difference. We even stepping into that kind of deliberate practice of positive routines within a lesson environment. So what we've covered why people might perceive deliberate practice to be repetitive and boring. And we did say, yes, it absolutely can be, but when done well, we know that actually it can be delivered age appropriate with an effective challenge. It can be included in different lesson structures to give opportunities. And if we can be really creative about our delivery, then we can include lots of opportunities for children to have choice, but still be deliberately practicing, to be involved in small-sided games that are modified, but still be deliberately practicing. But what we've also alluded to, which I absolutely love, is that we can deliberately practice our learning behaviours that are going to enable us to be better at all aspects of PE and school sport and in our lessons. So we can actually deliberately practice more than physical skills, and in a way that isn't repetitive or boring, that are going to help us develop as well.
Yeah, and just
I love that, Toni.
To finish from my perspective, is we talk a lot about comfort, stretch, panic. So obviously we want to avoid panic. Sometimes they arrive in panic. We want them into stretch, and I think that's what we're trying to do with all the children. I think Ronnie said, that's the bit where it comes in. Is how do we do that with 30 children? But I think it's definitely achievable. We can create that environment and that choice and start to build those behaviours and kind of those habits from a very young age. So I think it's definitely achievable.
I love this summary stuff, particularly yours, Toni, on the fact that it's all those skills. And I think the thing that's come out of all these real nonsense stuff is that the solution ends up being the fact that 2 or 3 things can all be true. That we're expected within our sector to decide to sit here and say, never do skills in isolation, only do skills in isolation until they're ready before we go to games. We're expected to kind of have these really strong opinions when actually the truth of learning and teaching is all about understanding how our children, the ones in front of us, making it accessible and exciting and giving them more choice around that. And the actual solutions we end up coming back with is lots of examples of it depends of their needs and being able to be flexible and even model the behaviours that we want with them, which was, this is the first time I'm trying something today. I feel a bit nervous, children. Is it okay if I try something, see how we get on? If you let me know, I'm going to give you these couple of choices and then we'll come back and you go, gosh, that really didn't work, didn't it? What did I get wrong? Did I not give you enough instructions at the start, or actually was great for you lot? Let you carry on. Let me go and work with these other ones for a bit because you're doing brilliant. Having that real honest learning experience and conversation and learn as a teacher with the children. And the very best are just incredibly sort of interactive and humble with those children and know it's okay to get it wrong because we're exploring, aren't we, together? And I'm loving the fact this real nonsense is always led us back to some high quality practice, but without saying to teachers there's only one way of doing this. And it depends, right? And here's some suggestions.
And part of any good teaching or coaching is to step back and observe. And I think sometimes what does happen because of that lack of confidence is like, I've got to follow this plan. And actually sometimes it's, okay, the children are starting to look a bit disengaged. Okay, right, now I need to. Right, is it I need to now move them into a different
And maybe
activity?
not all of them, right?
Well, or they might need a bit of stretch or challenge. Or maybe an adaptation. So I think it's that, it's not being rigid in terms of, right, I need to do this for 10 minutes and this for 20 minutes. It's, okay, I've started it. Step back, observe how the children are getting on, having those things, those little kind of 2 or 3 progressions kind of planned in, and then shifting that responsibility so that the children can take more ownership and not start to get bored or disengaged. They can move it on and when they're ready.
Great.
I think that's the real child-led stuff and it may well be it's different responses to different groups, right?
Lovely way to finish. Deliberate practice is repetitive and boring. Yes, we know it can be.
If not done well.
Yeah, if it's not done well. And hopefully we've provided you with some lovely solutions and something to think about today in our podcast to ensure that it's not.
Great.
Fab, thanks. Great to have you with us again.
Thank you, Toni.
Guys,
Thanks for all the challenge.
Looking forward to episode 14.
That's the end of episode 13 of Real Nonsense.
The real world.